migration numbers in the UK. Robert Jenrick has told LBC he agrees with Suella Braverman's statement the Tories have been too squeamish to tackle the issue in the past. But LBC's political editor Natasha Clark has been telling Iain Dale high-speed rail is still overshadowing the whole party conference.
How have they allowed HS2 and scrapping HS2, which we believe is an announcement that's meant to be coming very soon, to dominate this entire conference here in Manchester as we see it in the relics of an old Victorian railway station?
It's widely expected Rishi Sunak will announce plans to scrap the leg between Manchester and Birmingham tomorrow. The COVID inquiry's been hearing evidence of infighting at Downing Street as it begins looking into the process of political decision-making during the pandemic. Lead counsel Hugo Keith says messages and diary entries portray a depressing picture of a toxic atmosphere. A 22-year-old man has died after being stabbed in South London. It happened in Brixton earlier on this evening. And a factory worker who tampered with food products destined for high street restaurants has been jailed for more than 3 years. CCTV showed 38-year-old Gary Jones damaging tubs of hummus and also salad dressings. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 40 points at 74.70. The pound buys $1.20 and €1.15. LBC weather, outbreaks of rain in Scotland overnight, which could reach Northern Ireland. A few showers in other parts of the west, but mostly dry elsewhere, with a low of 6 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Tim Daly.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8:02 on LBC. Welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. I'm Iain Dale. With us on the panel tonight, we have Peter Bone, Conservative MP for Wellingborough. I always want to say Peter Bone. do you miss John Bercow?
I miss John Bercow. He was a good parliamentarian until he got this Brexit disease and affected his judgment.
Some might say you got it as well, Peter.
Yeah, but I was on the winning side.
Anna Mikhailova is Deputy Political Editor of the Mail on Sunday. Welcome to you, Anna. And also James Johnson is a pollster. We'll talk a little bit more about the art of polling a bit later in the programme. But if you'd like to ask a question, 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850. Send a message via Alexa. Just say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And of course, please watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first question. It's from David in Enfield. David, hi.
Good evening, panel. During her Tory conference speech today, Suella Braverman, King's Counsel and former Attorney General, suggested that the Human Rights Act should be called, quote, the Criminal Rights Act. Does the panel think she is still fit to be Home Secretary?
Peter Bone.
Well, she's still fit to be Home Secretary. I mean, Suella uses language that resonates with lots of people, and what she was saying, I think, is we're getting stuck in getting on with sending people to Rwanda who come here illegally because of our commitment to acts like that, which are actually helping criminal gangs, and I guess she's right on that.
But to say the whole Human Rights Act, it should be renamed the Criminal Rights Act, is pathetic at best.
Well, Suella has a way with words which perhaps I wouldn't use to say.
Which is interesting in itself, because you're seen as somebody on the right of the party, somebody who might be a natural defender of Suella Braverman.
Well, I think I think the whole of the government's policy on Rwanda is right for very many reasons, not least that when I chaired the all-party group for years against human trafficking, I know that these gangs are bringing people across, are the most evil people in the world, and if we can do anything to stop them, we should do it.
Anna.
Well, I think the question should be reframed, just because Suella Braverman's speech would have been very carefully read and gone over by number 10. You know, this kind of conference speech does not get done in a silo. It doesn't get done. She's not going off piste here. So if you think she's not fit to be Home Secretary, then I think the proper question is the government fit to be in government? And I'm sure that's obviously something that people will get a chance to answer within a few months.
But part of your job is presumably talking to MPs all hours of the day and night. They all sort of feed back their views on different ones of their colleagues, and I suspect you probably get more comments about Suella Braverman than most. What are Tory MPs telling you today?
Well, I mean, the Criminal Rights Act is going to absolutely infuriate a certain part of the party. There are already, well, for example, there are quite a few senior lawyers within the Conservative Party who, on whichever side of the Brexit debate they were on, for example, they would be furious about this sort of comment. Similarly, her position on the ECHR is quite unpopular with a lot of MPs, but equally it's also popular with others. So she is, I think sources close to her and her team will say that she plays a role that is useful for Rishi Sunak, who himself would never go anywhere near saying these things. But it's sort of having her.
So she's a bit of a lightning conductor for him.
Yeah, I mean, they'd call it, and how someone has phrased it to me is she's a bad cop. So he's good cop, she's bad cop. And that's how they see it, or how certain people in the party see it.
And James Johnson, how does the electorate see this? How does the electorate... somebody was telling me earlier today, they weren't a pollster, but they said they had seen polling that shows that she is the cabinet minister that the public dislike most.
Certainly with the wider public, she's not very popular, but her words do resonate. Now, obviously, some of those words you have to be careful, because there are words that politicians say are not just there to please the public, they've got to say the right thing as well. I think there was a reference to an invasion, not in her speech this time, but in the past. But we tested it as a poll. We put to the public, a representative sample of the public, a number of statements from Suella Braverman's speech from last week in Washington, D.C., where she spoke about immigration. She said things like multiculturalism has failed. She said things like immigration is an existential crisis facing the West. It made many people in the commentariat very, very angry. When you put it to the public, they agree by huge margins with that statement. Now, immigration attitudes are more complicated than that. We were putting the speech, literally Suella's words, to them, but it did show that they were more attracted to those words than repulsed by them. And I think there is a frustration amongst the public that politicians have not been straight talking about this issue. And they see, and lots of Conservative politicians as well as the public see, the Human Rights Act blocking the action that they want to see the government take, whether it's on immigration and small boats, or even things like giving the vote to prisoners, which obviously is one of the things that always comes up with the ECHR as well. So I think there is an attractiveness for the public with that kind of plain speaking, because they've seen politicians bang on about this for years and see nothing happen.
We all remember those posters from the 2005 election. It's not racist to talk about immigration, Conservative Party election posters, which it genuinely isn't. I don't believe it's racist. I mean, we talk about immigration on the programme a lot, but there are ways of doing it, aren't there, Peter? There are responsible ways of doing it and irresponsible ways of doing it. And if you do it with no sense of nuance, no sense of, well, some people think multiculturalism has failed because X, Y, Z. However, there are some very good examples of where it succeeded. She didn't do any of that at all, did she?
Yeah, but the good cop, bad cop thing is quite a good... I suppose Lee Anderson does that a bit as well. And it brings to the public, my constituents, what we're trying to say on immigration, and that we're being hampered by legal restraints. So I think there is a way of doing it. Now, obviously, if you ask me about multiculturalism, I say my seat I've always argued, as one of the best multicultural towns in the country. We often say, why don't you come down from London and have a look at how we do it in Wellingborough? So it is nuance, of course, but immigration is nuance. The 200,000 people that have come into this country from Ukraine, the British people welcome, but they don't want 50,000 coming across in small boats illegally. So that and there is a sense that we haven't tackled the problem. And now I think the Prime Minister say, well, we are tackling the problem, we're held up in the courts.
Anna?
I think going back to the point about the Human Rights Act and calling it Criminal Rights Act, and some of what James was saying, I think we're in a very luxurious and good position in this country to be able to dismiss something like the Human Rights Act, because frankly we have a strong democracy and we have rights citizens' rights tend to be protected much better than across the world. So to attack it is, I think, well...
OK. David, thanks for that. Let's move on to a sort of allied question here from Mike in Huddersfield. Mike, what would you like to ask the panel?
I'd like to ask if the UKIP party's takeover of the Conservative Party is now approaching completion.
Well, the fact that we see Nigel Farage walking around the conference centre and looking very happy and delighted, and the fact that the Prime Minister today said he'd be quite welcome to rejoin the Conservative Party. James Johnson, that there is a feeling that among a lot of people that that wing of the Conservative Party is now in complete control. I mean, obviously rather different from your days in Number 10.
Yeah, but look, I mean, I think this is the Conservative Party having to address issues that are facing the country now and issues that weren't around 10 years ago. Whether that might be, for example, concerns about what's being taught in schools on transgender issues, all the way through to illegal immigration and small boats. So, look, I think the important thing is what the policy is. And I've always say, when I've sat through my focus groups, done my polling, the thing that pushes people towards the most extreme solutions to these questions, the things that push people towards people like Viktor Orban in Hungary or Donald Trump in the US, is when politicians don't address these things. Now, the solutions, when you actually look at it, that the Conservatives are putting forward on these things are pretty reasonable. Rishi Sunak is not a rabid culture warrior. He actually is very interested in trying to, he would argue, actually make changes and get things done that are sensible. So although some of the rhetoric might go a bit over the top, and as we alluded to with Suella Braverman, when you actually look at the fix here, these are quite mainstream ways to address them, and it's better to do that and get the public on your side than appear to ignore them, and then they go, well, these guys aren't doing anything, so I'll look for an extreme solution instead.
Peter?
I pretty much agree with that analysis. Obviously, Nigel Farage's big reason for setting up UKIP was to get us out of the EU. I worked with him in Grassroots Out, and we achieved our goal. Nigel would fit in very nicely on the right-hand side of the very broad church of the Conservative Party. I'd certainly welcome him in. The Prime Minister would welcome him in. I think the one person that doesn't want to do it is probably Nigel Farage.
Yes, he has said that he has no intention of rejoining the Conservative Party. Did he say yet?
No, I've said that.
All right, okay. I must have missed that. Anna?
Well, I was going to say, I think the reason Rishi Sunak did that so confidently was because Nigel Farage has repeatedly ruled out. And we just have to remember, he's a very, very effective campaigner. He is definitely box office in conference. He's always swarmed by people who want to talk to him. But he has also unsuccessfully run for Parliament multiple times. So I think if you're Nigel Farage, off the back of the big victory against the banks this summer, the last thing you're going to do is try and run again and probably fail again.
I'm not sure that would be true, because I suspect he would get selected in a very safe Conservative seat if he did that. And of course the thing then that would happen is that he would get elected, he would sit on the Conservative benches, and there would be a substantial number of people, particularly within the voluntary party, that would quite like him to be leader of the Conservative Party, and I'm sure he would like to be leader of the Conservative Party. But then you run the risk, James, I'm looking at you because you work for Theresa May. I mean, the kind of people who would be described as Mayites, sort of social liberals, sort of people maybe on the sort of left of the Conservative Party, though Theresa May herself would always have described herself as on the right, I think, they might then split away because they couldn't stomach. Several people I've talked to here at this conference said that would be it. I couldn't be a Conservative if Nigel Farage was a member.
I think if Nigel Farage became leader, I think that would cause a huge split.
How entertaining would it be?
It would be quite entertaining.
But no, I think we're missing the point. The Prime Minister wants Nigel. He's a great campaigner. What ministerial role could he be? Could he be Foreign Secretary, Home Secretary, party chairman? I mean, there's a role for him, and if we're always Conservative, expanding our offer, and I think it would be really good. No, I don't. Look, if the Prime Minister wants Nigel Farage, I want him.
I'm not sure that many members of the public would probably disagree. We've got to remember this guy is a very divisive figure, rightly or wrongly. He is seen as very divisive. But look,
I think his views on Ukraine might rule him out of being Foreign Secretary, Peter.
Yeah, I think that is probably. He talks a lot about boats. Wasn't he the first person who really brought the?
He was on a boat, wasn't he?
Look, why not make him Home Secretary?
Well, he was when he was on LBC.
He was.
I remember he took a sort of camera down to Dover, and he was the first to really alert people.
Purely politically, the most sensible thing to have done in the immediate aftermath of the Brexit referendum would have been to put Nigel Farage in the House of Lords.
It was absolutely I suggested that
because it would have lanced the Brexit Party boil, lanced the Reform UK boil, and I'm sure Nigel Farage would have not have been a great supporter, but it would have been quite difficult for him to break break off and start another party.
It would be lovely to know what he would have been of, Lord Farage of. Actually, that may be... Shall we have that as our final text question? It won't obviously be a text question because I've just made it up. But what should Lord Farage be of? Corey will have a think about that one. He's not looking particularly keen at the moment. But keep your calls coming, 0345 6060 973, and we will put them to our marvellous panel. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
17 minutes past 8 on LBC. Peter Bone is with us, Conservative MP for Wellingborough. It's Wellingborough and Rushton, isn't it?
It will be.
Oh,
it will be. I always call it Wellingborough.
I was always
the Electoral Commission have now agreed that next election that's what it will be.
Right, I'm glad we've cleared that up. Anna Mikhailova is Deputy Editor of the Mail on Sunday. Before we come to the next question, James, focus groups. I've never met anyone who's been on a focus group. I've watched one or two happen. How do you select people to go on them?
Yeah, so what we do is we have what's called a screener, which is a set of questions. So we'll make sure that they're not members of a political party. We'll make sure they're not, elected councillor, not a sort of, undercover agent for the Labour or Conservative Party. And then we'll basically select
or more
people,
likely the Liberal Democrat.
Indeed. And then we'll select people based on the views we're trying to pick up. So they're not intended to be representative. So if we go and do one with swing voters, for example, we'll pick people who are Conservative in 2019, now undecided or switching to Labour. And you want usually a mix of male, female, but you can't be representative in a group of 8 or 10 people.
No.
These things, focus groups, I get a lot of stick on Twitter for focus groups because people say, what on earth are you doing? You're just bringing a gaggle of people. It's just like us having a chat. How is that representative? It's not. It's there to dig underneath the polls and see how people talk and think about leaders, about politicians, about messages, about companies, and see that nuance underneath the polling numbers.
Have you ever taken a senior politician to a focus group and asked the focus group what they think of that politician without them knowing that the politician is watching behind the glass?
Oh, it's something I do quite frequently, especially in the US, where there's we do that quite a lot. And I think once I did have to sort of try and I didn't, because I was in the chair in the room, but I did hear that a politician was quite angry at how she was being characterised. Did I think try to sort of bust through the glass and join the focus group and try and put them to rights? But of course we never let that happen.
Do you never do a reveal at the end?
I've done it once or twice for corporate stuff where the CEO's there or something. But politicians, you want to keep them well away, because otherwise people will go to other focus groups in the future and think someone's watching or whatever else, and you don't want to ruin the surprise.
What do you think of focus groups, Peter?
My focus groups is knocking on the doors every week, and those are really good focus groups because we're just knocking on Mrs. Smith's door, 5 the High Street. And sometimes what you say in polls and focus, I recognise on the doorstep. The thing that seems to happen is that we are ahead of because we knock and we do it all the time. We tend to be ahead of trends, and then people catch on. And I think at the moment, your analysis earlier on, I agreed with, but it would be from my focus groups, which is thousands of people. We knock on doors every week.
And Andrew Mitchell told me once that when in the 97 election campaign, when he was in a marginal seat, and he'd been the MP there, I think, for 10 years, and he was walking down the street one day and this woman came up to him and he had helped her in a very difficult constituency case and she'd been really grateful to him. And she said to him, he said, well, I hope I'm going to get your vote on May the 1st or whenever it was. And she said, Mr. Mitchell, I think you're a fantastic MP, but I'm afraid not. Things have got to change. Now, have you had any of those conversations?
Not quite like that, but I remember 97, and I remember what was happening. I was inheriting the safe seat of Pudsey, 5,500 Tory majority, turned it into a 3,000 Labour majority. But the people on the doorstep were going from Conservative voters to possible voters, and they were going to Blair. They liked Blair. This time, what's happening is the Conservative votes are going to possible voters, but they're not going across to Keir Starmer. It's not the same thing. So we've got a year, I guess, to get things right, pull our socks up and get those back. But it could be as bad as 97, or we could turn it around.
So it's the stay-at-homes. So the people in Selby and Ainsty, actually, the Conservative voters there, where they lost 2/3 of the vote. The Labour vote didn't actually go up that much, but the Conservative vote plummeted. I mean, are you seeing that in your surveys, James?
Oh, definitely. I mean, somebody in a recent focus group that I did described the choice at the next election as between worse and worser. And, that's the sort of feeling. They don't feel particularly excited by Keir Starmer. And I think it is interesting, isn't it, when you look back at the 90s, Blair was an incredibly rare thing in politics because he was able to make that connection with voters and capture the zeitgeist. Keir Starmer does not do that. He gets written off in my focus groups from everything from slimeball to smarmy to yes man, people pleaser. They really have not taken a liking to him, and that is the sort of the one chink of light really for the Conservatives when it comes to the next election. So they can draw that contrast with them and Keir Starmer. It'll make a really big deal. I must say, at my last focus group, slightly jokingly, we did snog, marry, avoid. Ed Davey, Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer. And but some people wanted to marry Rishi Sunak because he's rich. Some people... There was a lot of snogs for Ed Davey. I don't know what was going on there. Oh. But the really interesting thing is most people did want to marry Keir Starmer. And when I asked why, they said, Keir Starmer, because... And, they can't finish the sentence. They don't really know why. And I think that sums up the next election. They're with Starmer because they're so annoyed with the current situation. But are they locked in with him? I'm not so sure.
I had to do Snog, Marry, Avoid on my latest edition of the For the Many podcast, but it was with 3 political journalists, which sadly didn't include Anna.
Oh.
I'm not sure how to take that.
Thank God. Otherwise, it'd be really embarrassing in this.
A lineup of 3 here, Ian.
Right, let's go. No, definitely not. Let's go to our next text question from Sam in Cambridge. Cancelling the northern end of HS2 surely means that the Conservatives will lose the whole of the Red Wall now. Does the panel think they've shot themselves in the foot? Now, reports tonight say the PM will tell us tomorrow that HS2 will actually run to Manchester and to London's Euston Station. But between Birmingham and Manchester, it'll use the existing West Coast main line and not be a high-speed railway. Not quite sure that's going to work, but Anna, what are you hearing on this?
Well, obviously the timing has slightly been. It doesn't seem ideal doing all this in Manchester or having it have to happen in Manchester. But I mean, what MPs and government people are saying is that there seems to be this line that keeps coming up, which is after the pandemic. Behaviours have changed and 30% fewer people use railways, and that's why it's going to be okay. So that is what usually the response, well, the last few days as I've been walking around has been. Of course, it's a slightly strange argument because of course, if you look beyond that and beyond the trends of the pandemic, it's still we want it to be a rising population. We don't want sort of everyone sitting at home in theory. So when you match that up with going for growth and productivity, it doesn't quite fit in. But that seems to be, I think, the narrative. And Peter might correct me, but that's certainly the narrative I'm picking up in terms of people who aren't saying this is a nightmare and aren't saying it's a disaster.
Peter.
Well, if it's right, I mean, I've been against to from the start. I think it was a complete waste of money. So if we're going to say, I don't know, £40 billion by not building it, and plough a lot of that money into the north and the Midlands in improving roads and rail, and that will improve the lives of people so much better and so much quicker. That's a really good idea. And if it's then going to go on to Manchester on the ordinary lines, well, I mean, remember Concorde? You used to fly across the Atlantic on Concorde, and then it used to go on to Texas subsonic. So why not? That actually doesn't sound. It sounds. If we're going to say 40 billion, let's spend a lot of that on the infrastructure that help people and save a bit of money as well. And let's face it,
there's been so much money ploughed into it already, hasn't
yeah, but that's not a reason to waste more money. And I think that's the thing that people have got to focus on. It's such a big, if I said I was spending £10,000 and everyone understands it, but 40 billion, I mean, what's that, 40,000 million pounds, it's just incomprehensible. But if you say you can actually have a better road surface, you can have a line that is electrified, you can have more capacity on that line, you can get east-west trains going properly. I take the reverse of what you said, Ian, about losing the red wall vote, because I think actually that will win it, because people want to see that. They don't want to see it wasted on George Osborne's toy railway.
So this is an interesting thing in that if you talk, I was watching somebody do some Vox Pops of people in Manchester on this, and of course the journalist expected everyone in Manchester to be up in arms that this might not be built. On the contrary, I mean, there were quite a lot of people that didn't want it to be built, that thought it was a complete waste of money. James, again on the polling, what does the polling tell us?
Yeah, well, this is quite a London-centric view, I think. This sort of, he's scrapping it from Manchester, that's terrible. But actually, people in Manchester, and especially the swing seats around Manchester, Greater Manchester, are pretty frustrated by it, because the line that's taken on, and the thing that I hear over and over again when I speak to the public, is it's only going to save half an hour. Now, I don't even know if that's true, but that line, whether true or not, has really caught on in the public sort of view. So therefore, I mean, Peter's absolutely right. The appeal of east to west rail in the north is much more appealing than HS2. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, when you read out the policy there, Ian, I mean, it was rather long-winded. I do think this number 10 do have a habit of, just say it, just be punchy and make a decision. All sort of, rail might run. I mean, maybe that's just getting the details out before the big speech tomorrow, but it does seem a little bit like
James, they've got such a punchy conference slogan. How can you?
Well, quite. It's a little bit like just. I mean, we do have to remember Rishi Sunak is a technocrat. He is not the sort of straight speaker, perhaps, that he could or should be.
You sometimes wonder, don't you, who are these people in the room when these decisions are made? I mean, what conversation? Well, you've been in the room, James. I mean, with people who presumably you had an input into conference slogans in years gone by. You think, how did they come up with something so crass?
I know. But look, I think the slogan is so difficult, right? I mean, getting a good slogan is incredibly hard. Most of them are forgotten. Nobody really goes and thinks about it ever again. I think the point in the slogan is what it says about the strategy, what it says about how you're trying to differentiate themselves.
I mean, I've just thought of a brilliant slogan which they should have had. Just 3 words, because we all know that three-word slogans really work. For the future. That's all you need.
People would. If I said that to my focus groups, they go, "Oh God, what does it mean?" Everyone.
It means that the Conservative Party is thinking about the future and will come up with policies for it, rather than sort of difficult decisions.
Is it a subset of for the many, though?
This is important, though. This is important. This point, though, about long-term decisions, because what they're trying to get at here is that compared to what's come before, whether it's Labour or Boris Johnson or Liz Truss or even David Cameron, Rishi Sunak is going to be the person that levels with the public, and that is what they're trying to get at with that slogan. And to be honest with you, that's pretty much the best route they've got out of a few good options to try and differentiate themselves from Keir Starmer, who they say doesn't believe in anything.
Right, we will take more of your calls and questions in just a moment. The number to call, 0345 6060 973. Now, after 9, we are going to be talking about whether the Conservative Party has become the party of Nigel Farage. We're interested in your views on that. You can phone in after 9 with your views there. Right, it's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines from Tim Daly.
The immigration minister says previous Conservative governments have made the wrong choices on migration. Speaking on LBC, Robert Jenrick has blamed Boris Johnson for a rise in the number of people coming into the country legally. The former Manchester United footballer Gary Neville has told LBC HS2 should go to Manchester and says the Tories have done everything but level up. It's widely expected Rishi Sunak will announce plans to scrap the leg between Birmingham and Manchester tomorrow. And planned strikes on the London Underground tomorrow and Friday have been called off. A walkout by train drivers at 16 operators is still due to go ahead on Wednesday, though. LBC weather, outbreaks of rain in Scotland overnight, which could reach Northern Ireland. A few showers in other parts of the west, but mostly dry elsewhere, with an overnight low of 6 degrees.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:33 on LBC. With us here in Manchester, Peter Bone, the Conservative MP for Wellingborough, soon to be Anne Rushton. Anna Mikhailova is Deputy Editor of the Mail on Sunday, and we have James Johnson, who is a political opinion pollster. Remind us the name of your company again.
JL Partners.
That's the one. It's not written down on my thing here. Right, let's go to another question from Mo. It's a text question. The Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, told Andrew Marr that integration is absolutely critical to the success of a country, and there are places in the UK where you do not see the level of integration that we want. Why does the government feel the need to tell only immigrant communities in the UK to integrate when some white communities prefer not to live amongst immigrants? James.
Oh, that's a tough one, isn't it? Look, I think if you look at some of the stats on this, in places like Blackburn, in places like Birmingham, the divisions are really, really serious. And actually, I don't think it's necessarily to do with potentially immigrants or people who've lived here for a very long time, or whoever it might be. I think a lot of it comes down to housing and inequities in housing. A lot of it comes down to schools. I remember before I did polling, I worked at an education charity, and I was amazed to find just how sort of segregated segregated our schools are. There are some schools, with just 99%, 100% white students, and others that are 99%, 100% minority ethnic pupils in areas that are quite mixed. So I think the schools and housing has a thing to do with it. But look, I also think we need to not beat around the bush. There are, and it's certainly not a majority. It's certainly not even a plurality. There are a small number of immigrant communities that are quite insular, and especially as you get sort of more extreme on the religious side, there's absolutely no doubt that is a factor in some parts of Birmingham. So yes, we need to look at extremism on both sides clearly, but this is an onus on all communities, including people who aren't in immigrant families, to contribute and to integrate in the society that they've joined.
Do you think, Anna, that in some ways we're picking and choosing our immigrant communities here, where we don't hear sort of much comment made on the fact that Orthodox Jews have congregated generally in sort of North London? People don't see that as an issue, but when it happens in Burnley, for example, where there are parts of Burnley that are literally 100% Muslim, it attracts a lot of comment. Are we being hypocrites here?
Well, I think there's a long history of, first of all, if you look at, our country, but also America, for example, you have the waves of immigrants and how you'll get one wave and then they sort of settle in a bit and become more accepted, and it's the next wave from whichever country it is that becomes the more, the immigrants that people start worrying about. Here we saw it when the European Union hugely opened up its borders, and there was the influx of Eastern European immigrants who of course are largely white, but there was a lot of angry sentiment about that at the same time. So I think ultimately, to answer the original question, it's a really, really thorny, complicated issue full of socioeconomic factors, but also I think a very big part of it is that politicians of all stripes have not made the case for migration, not made the positive case for migration. So I remember one MP telling me that in his constituency people were extremely worried about immigrants coming in and taking their jobs. And this MP said, did lots of door knocks, and that wasn't actually a problem in that specific constituency, but people had the fear that people from somewhere were coming into the country and could be taking their jobs. So that's a sort of case where someone really needs to say, well, hold on, first of all, that's not actually happening in this area, but that's not an irrational view. That's just something that hasn't been properly addressed, explained, and tackled. And that is an interesting point, isn't it, Peter, that politicians do have a role to maybe correct people's impressions. And there are, I remember when I was a candidate in North Norfolk, immigration was a big issue. I mean, it really was on the doorstep. I'm thinking, this is weird. The population of North Norfolk, I think, has a 1.5% immigrant makeup. You think, well, why are people so afraid? And it's because they're led to be afraid, I think, by a lot of partly a lot of the media, but also by politicians who maybe don't correct the record enough.
It's difficult for me to recognise that, because in Wellingborough we're such a multicultural city. Town. We've got huge Hindu population, Muslim. We've got a mosque in the town. We've also got Afro-Caribbean, and we had a lot of Eastern European. And we all get on together, and it's never an issue. There's never been National Front or whatever they're called these days in my constituency. And I just sometimes, with Indian Republic Day, a great event and when I go on the stage, I always say, I wish the Prime Minister of the day would come down and see how we do it here. Because if we can do it in the little old Wellingborough, why can't we do it across the country? And it works. I never hear anybody with any racial abuse in my area, and yet if there was one, it could be in our area, because we've got lots of different people of different races, and why is it worse elsewhere?
Have they all have the different races congregated in different areas? I mean, together.
Well,
it's a natural thing.
Yeah, I mean, when people came over, I suppose the Indian population came over and they were in one area, and the Muslims are next to them, and the Sikhs, but nobody thinks about that. It's not. The schools you were mentioning, well, all our schools, you'll see all different people in it. So what's gone wrong in those places where they've where say Muslims are just in one school and perhaps white people in. Something's gone wrong there, and then maybe you're right. Maybe people are, but I say, government, come and look how it's done in Wellingborough, and translate it elsewhere.
I think two things. That point about Norfolk is right. A lot of places that are most concerned about immigration have not seen high levels of immigration, but what they have seen in the last 10 years is an increased rate of change. So they've seen the rate of immigration go up in their area. Now, if you're in a place where you've only had 0.5% and that goes to 1%, that's a doubling. You notice that, and it might well have an impact on things like schools and jobs and other issues. So I think that's number one on that. I think the other thing I'd say, to come back to this point about integration, and it's a separate point, is there is still a teacher in hiding in Batley because he showed students a cartoon of Prophet Muhammad, of the religion of Islam. That is not something, as far as I'm aware, that you see in Orthodox Jew areas in North London. And there is an onus on not necessarily immigrant communities. These people might not be immigrants at all, but there is an onus on some of those areas in the community for those issues not to take place. So I think we shouldn't hide away from that. If we hide away from that, we're not going to tackle the problem. It's just going to make it worse.
And what feedback do you get from your readers on this sort of issue? Or, I don't know, sort of 20 or 30 years ago, you'd have like hundreds, thousands of people writing into newspapers. Do they do that now? Or, how does it work?
It's all online, isn't it?
Yeah. It's not the same, is it, as getting a letter?
No, Mail Online gets so many comments. I do like to read them, but...
Do you?
I do. I think it's always interesting.
Is it good for your mental health to read them?
Well, it's not about me, so I think it is. It's fine. But I think there is definitely a role for more positive message about immigration, because immigrants are plugging such important roles across the NHS, across social care, across all sorts of areas that need to be filled, and I think that should be really the focus, frankly.
I would say on that, though, that universally in my patch, people are really against people coming across in small boats illegally, and that's across the board. So they think, well, we've all come here legally, we've all done the right thing. These people are trying to game the system, and that's something that's...
And how often does that come up on the doorstep? Unprovoked, people say, right, the number one thing that I'm concerned is the small boats.
It's hard to believe, but it is actually the number one issue. It's even more comes up on the doorstep than the cost of living.
See, I find this difficult to compute, because I'll have another MP, maybe from your own party as well, on this programme, and they say it never comes up on the doorstep at all, ever. Never hear of it. Why would that be?
Well, because we do it all the time, we know what comes up. It may be, you might have the answer, it may be different in different parts of the country.
This is the thing, I think this is why we have polling, hooray. Who'd have known?
I knew there was a reason.
And amongst Conservative voters who now say they don't know how they'd vote, key group of people for Rishi Sunak to win back, it is the number one issue. And number two is cost of living, number three is NHS. And it's exactly what Peter and Anna alluded to. It's this sense of unfairness. And you get that amongst immigrant communities, you also get it amongst non-immigrant communities. This feeling of why are they able to do that? I actually think attitudes on small boats would be very, very different if we were right there next to countries that are war zones. But a lot of the frustration is they feel that they've gone through numerous safe countries on the way, and then we put them in hotels or whatever the various lines people use are, and that is really dangerous for support for immigration, but also integration in the country as a whole.
Right, we will move on to other subjects in just a few moments' time. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's coming up to 8:44.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
We have with us Peter Bone, Anna Mikhailova and James Johnson. Let's go to Hassan in Cambridge. Hi, Hassan.
Hello. Hi. Has it become too easy or consequence-free for our politicians to accuse their opponents of anti-Semitism or being a threat to the Jewish community, like Susan Hall has just done with Sadiq Khan?
Well, Susan Hall is the Tory London mayoral candidate. In fact, I ran into her this afternoon and she made a joke about, I don't wonder how many more gaffes I'm going to make at this conference, well, she seems to have made another one. I don't know why I'm laughing. She claimed yesterday that London's Jewish community is frightened, her words not mine, of the divisive attitude of Mayor Sadiq Khan. She's since claimed her comments were misinterpreted. Meanwhile, Mr Khan has told LBC her comments remind him of the Conservatives' negative, xenophobic, divisive campaign, again his words, against him when Zac Goldsmith ran in 2016. Peter Bone.
She's made a number of gaffes, hasn't she? Didn't she say she was going to be the first female Labour mayor?
Yeah.
So she's not going too well. Look, I just don't agree with what she said. So, we make mistakes on campaign trails.
I mean, what she said, I think, to be kind to her has been slightly overinterpreted, but you could interpret it in that way if you wanted to, and that's the problem, isn't it?
The problem is, look, she's going to be a great candidate and get rid of Mayor Khan, I'm absolutely... But slightly inexperienced because alarm bells would ever ring and you'd never say something like that. And because it can always
you'd never say anything out of order, would you?
It can never be misinterpreted, what I say. I think it's always pretty clear.
James?
Yeah, look, I think this is exactly that. I mean, she's clearly, not a seasoned campaigner, and she's made this.
She's been a member of the London Assembly for quite some time.
That's true. I suppose this is another level of limelight, I guess. I mean, it's interesting because Sadiq Khan is, politically very savvy to make that point about the divisive campaign against him, because
which it was,
and he also, managed to, politically use that to up the Labour turnout. Lots of people said, we can't let this man get in Zac Goldsmith. Now we could see that happen again in this campaign. It's worth saying this is going to be a really tight race in London potentially. We had a poll out last week showing Susan Hall only 3 points behind Sadiq Khan. Now, in a situation where Labour is 20 points ahead nationally, in London to only be 3 points ahead is pretty bad news for the Labour mayor. But stories like this will get his turnout up. So Susan Hall's going to have to be very careful. Maybe it's best if she sort of doesn't say anything at all over the next year if she can avoid it.
No. We want to encourage lots more Susan Hall, don't we, Anna?
Yeah, I think as journalists, Ian, we do. I think I don't like really the argument that she's inexperienced, therefore she made a gaffe. Well, we don't want politicians who become so slick that they never say anything. We sort of want people who have the common sense not to say things like that in the first place.
Well, I think the thing about London, I think that what was said will be forgotten, but what won't be forgotten is the way the mayor has run London, and the congestion charges, use leads, the fact that you can't drive around London because of bus lanes, the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. Those are the things, and I think Keir Starmer's panicking about it, because how could he lose London in an election next year and then go on and win the general election later? It's going to be tougher. I reckon fly on the wall when the Mayor of London speaks to the leader of the Labour Party.
Or indeed the Mayor of Manchester, Greater Manchester, speaks to the leader of the Labour Party. I think that's quite an interesting one too. When I've said this on the programme before, so there's no revelation, but they did approach me to run for the candidacy for Mayor of London on the basis that, I'm reasonably well known in London, etc. And I just had no interest in doing it whatsoever. But one of the reasons was I just thought it was completely unwinnable. And why would I want to spend a year of my life sort of doing that sort of thing? And I'd have to give up this job. But now, of course, I think, well, actually, if I had done it, 3% behind.
I think a lot of people are thinking that right now. The Conservative Party.
Ian, you'd have been a great mayor of London. Perhaps one day you will be a great mayor of London. But you're also an experienced campaigner. You're a great media communicator. Yeah. That would have, they wouldn't have let you on the list for some reason.
There was another bigger problem. I don't live in London, which they didn't seem to think was a problem, but I did somehow.
Well, they'd probably want you to move to London.
Yeah, not going to happen. Right, let's do another text question. This is from Penny in Pimlico. It's Black History Month. Which Black Briton do you admire or would you like to work with? I think that's a really, really interesting one because we've got so many black role models in our society now which just weren't there so many years ago. And I think people often say, well, there's no White History Month. Well, there kind of is the other 11 months of the year in some ways. So I've never been against this whole idea of Black History Month because it does actually encourage us to think a little bit more about some aspects of our history. Anna?
Well, I would have said Sharon White, but I think she's stepping down.
Well, you can still say her.
I can still say it. Yeah, I was always impressed with interviews with her. I've never met her or anything, but
Okay.
I'm quite excited for the new Doctor Who, Nushti Gatwa, who is in Sex Education, and he's going to be
fantastic at Sex Education.
Shooty.
Sorry, apologies.
Which there is a new series of just started. I'm very excited to know.
Yeah.
And he's in the Barbie films.
Oh no, you see, that's done it for me. I don't want to watch him anymore.
But people always. I'm afraid I am a not very closeted Doctor Who fan, and everybody complains about the show's really woke. They're just getting people on. He is a cracking actor, and I think he's going to restart it.
Did you know there's a Dalek just over the other side?
I've had a picture with said Dalek.
I'll bet you have. I'll bet you have. In fact,
Incredibly lame.
So is Corey. You're in good company.
Perfect.
Peter.
I used to hide behind the sofa when Dalek's on. God, that shows how old that programme must be. If I turn to the political field and think, who has really done something dramatic for the Conservative? Well, Priti Patel. Was she the first black Home Secretary? Probably was.
I think so, yes.
And you know, we in the Conservative Party take these things
well, it depends on your definition of black, I suppose, and here we're entering dangerous territory.
Gosh, well,
Sajid Javid, I think, would beat her to that.
But you see, but female as well. The fact that the Conservative Party now, Labour Party always talks about equality, and yet we prove it with whoever we choose as leader of how many 3 women prime ministers, the majority.
Yeah, only one of them was any good.
No, you're right. Margaret Thatcher was exceptionally good, and nobody's going to touch her. But we were talking about who was Black History Month, so I'm going to go for Priti Patel.
Okay. Did you see the picture of her doing karaoke with Nigel Farage?
Yeah, well, you see, I think Nigel's coming back to the party because when those two are dancing together.
In 6 minutes' time, everyone will be able to have their say on that one. Right, let's go to Beatrice in Gloucester, who says, is the use of conspiracy theories and blatant lies about opposition parties during cabinet ministers' speeches a new, sinister turn for our politics, or is it actually nothing particularly new? Transport Secretary Mark Harper has come under fire for referencing 15-minute cities and claiming councils are trying to restrict where people are allowed to travel to and how often. Meanwhile, Energy Secretary Claire Coutinho claimed Labour has considered imposing a meat tax, despite there being no evidence of Labour ever having put this forward as a policy. James.
Well, I think that they're actually two quite different things. The meat tax is a classic bit of political throwabout. I think Claire Coutinho's point was that if in the absence of any other plans to reach the targets, Labour would need to bring something like that in. I think we see that kind of thing in politics all the time from both sides. The 15-minute city thing, I wouldn't say it's so much sinister, but it is pretty stupid. I mean, this is the problem of being sort of terminally online. I think you get these sort of strange things and conspiracy theories that sound either sort of weird and left field to normal people, or actually sound quite positive. Being able to get around your city in a short period of time, and be able to get to all your amenities in a short period of time, I should say. So I think the Conservative Party needs to be careful about this kind of thing. This has infected the right in parts of Europe. It's infected the right in America. These very online sort of memes and conspiracy theories. I don't think it necessarily damages them. I just think it looks really weird.
I mean, this 15-minute city thing, I'm pretty sure it comes from an idea put forward by Canterbury City Council. So, I mean, there's something in it, but it's maybe not quite how it was portrayed. And Anna, you know Mark Harper. I mean, he's not exactly somebody you would think of as being on the populist right into conspiracy theories, is he?
No, but it is something that does come up talking to MPs. Peter will be able to say more on this, but I've had several MPs say that people on the doorstep do mention 15-minute cities quite a lot. So it's something that seems to be in the public consciousness.
Have you ever had that?
Probably through Twitter.
Twitter. That's not the real world. But I've never had that come up on my doorstep. But then we're not a city, and maybe that's look. What I hate is all the negative campaigning on both sides. But then on the other hand, the reason negative campaigning happens is it works, and I think that's our problem. I'd love you to tell me that isn't the case, but I fear it is.
No, I think it is. It's like voters, when you show voters, lines from politicians or attack ads or whatever it might be, they say, oh, goodness, I don't like this, why can we not all be positive? But it's a little bit like when people say, when they listen to the radio, they want to hear good news rather than bad news. They say that, but no one tunes into the good news.
Well, having said that, on the odd occasion, I deliberately do a good news hour. Pick some sort of story from the news. I mean, don't do it that often, but whenever I do, I always get people texting and say, "Oh, thank you for doing that," because that's so different. We're all fed up with all the doom and gloom all the time, but it's sort of quite a delicate balance because bad news is news, good news is advertising, isn't it?
And if you think there's been negative campaigning in previous elections, strap yourselves in for next year, because both sides are basically going to be capitalising on the downsides of each other. People have kind of given up hope in believing in a positive vision because they've been let down so many times by the Conservatives, and they don't really believe it from Labour either.
But if you think it's this bad, go and watch an Australian election. I mean, they are the most visceral elections and their negative attack. I mean, we could never do those in this country. No. You just couldn't.
Well, try it in America, where we could even have a candidate in prison. We could have a candidate in prison.
Could have a president in prison.
Yeah, I tell you what, where the Conservative Party is making a mistake is we are not telling the good news story since 2019. And that's a little bit because of internal politics, that perhaps people in government don't want to say how well Boris Johnson did, getting Brexit done, getting the first vaccination in Europe, Oh,
you're going to set the switchboard alight in a minute if you can.
Well, no, but, it's true, getting us through COVID, organising the European...
Just being generally brilliant.
Yeah, generally brilliant. Yeah. And we just don't say that enough, do we?
No.
This is the guy that torched Conservative electoral fortunes. He had a massive majority and he threw it all away.
Oh, now, we're not getting away. You're not getting away with it.
Anyway.
Boris was 6 points...
Why did I allow this
6 points behind. Look, no, that's not fair. And I tell you what, on the doorstep, you know what people sometimes say to me? I would vote Conservative again if it was Boris, and I say, Boris is 100% behind Rishi, so come and vote for it.
Did your nose grow longer when you said that?
No, because I've been with Boris tons of times, and the one thing Boris wants is a Conservative government next time and to support
He's
Rishi.
no fan. You and I both know that he is no fan of Rishi.
You also know that he will say, the first thing he'll say at any meeting is we must get behind and get a Conservative government
He will, but privately... Anyway, now our fun question at the end is from Gordon, who says, can the panellists suggest a campaign song for each of the main parties for the next election? Anna, what
Thank you for coming to me
got?
first, Ian. I've only got one for the Lib Dems, which is Another Brick in the Wall.
Another brick. Emphasis on the B.
Mm-hmm.
Peter.
Oh, on the Liberals, Ode to Joy.
No, on anything.
Ode to Joy. But our one should be, I think there's one, things can only get better would be good for the Conservatives.
Well, it worked for Tony Blair, didn't it?
It is. So what I said that, and it was quite nice. Yeah. As I really struggle with Keir Starmer because he doesn't inspire me in anything, and I'm afraid I just couldn't come by anything for Labour.
James?
Well, I've got a bit of a cop-out on this because I asked a focus group this a week ago.
Of course you did.
Now, they weren't really... They were more, I think, coming up with ideas that summed up the party in their minds. So they said for Rishi Sunak, it would be the Imperial March tune from Star Wars, which is what the Emperor or Darth Vader walked onto.
He is a Star Wars fan, isn't he?
Yeah, I'm not sure they like the reason they were saying it. They say he's gone to the dark side and he's a bit evil. Keir Starmer, they had the same answer as Peter. They couldn't come up with one. So is it better to be Darth Vader than...
That's not a good place to be, is it?
This is the thing. This is the choice. Darth Vader versus... sort of tumbleweed moment.
That was a tumbleweed moment. Peter, Anna.
That was cruel,
James, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on LBC. We have another panel for you tomorrow. We'll be back in London. Gina Miller will be joining us, one of Peter's greatest admirers. The Conservative peer, Lord Jonathan Marland, and the columnist and author Yasmin Alabai-Brown. So that should be a sparky one. Now, in the next hour, we're going to go back to something we talked about earlier in the programme, and the fact that Nigel Farage has been omnipresent at this conference. He's here in his role as a broadcaster, but Rishi Sunak said today that he would welcome him back as a Conservative Party member. Well, I wonder if you're a Conservative Party member, if you would welcome him back into the Conservative Party, and if he did come back to the Conservative Party, do you think that would mean that there is real evidence now that the Conservative Party is now the party of Nigel Farage, that the UKIP takeover would have been complete? 0345 6060 973. And if you are a Conservative voter, would Nigel Farage rejoining the party influence your vote or not?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading